Imagine sitting in the middle of your son's high school graduation when two men in black suits walk straight toward you. They call you by name. They say you have to leave now, but you're a Marine, and you've missed two. Many moments already. Then, before you can answer, 6 Navy SEALs rise from the crowd, and the entire room goes silent. It was one of those warm June afternoons where the sun poured through the tall windows of the high school auditorium, casting a soft golden glow across the polished wooden floors. The place was packed wall to wall. Proud families filled every seat, their voices blending into a low, excited hum. Cameras clicked in quick bursts, flashes popping like tiny fireworks as parents tried to capture every second. Some clutched bouquets of flowers. Others held handmade posters with glittery letters, ready to cheer the moment their child's name was called. In the middle rows, sitting tall and still, was Marine Sergeant David 2 Block. His dress blues were spotless, his shoes polished until they gleamed, his medals catching the light. He wasn't there to be noticed. Marines don't go looking for attention, but anyone who glanced his way could tell this was a man of discipline, a man who'd lived through things most people only read about. Today, though, wasn't about him. It was about his son Ethan, 18 years old, about to step onto that stage and close one chapter of his life before, stepping into the unknown of the next. Two's mind replayed. Memories in fragments, a boy running through the yard with a toy football, birthday cakes with candles he'd missed blowing out, letters with crayon drawings sent to him when he was halfway across the world. For years, duty had called him away. He'd served in places where the air was thick with heat and tension, where the nights were so quiet you could hear your own heart pounding under your gear. He'd been gone for deployments that stretched endlessly, missing baseball games, school plays, and holidays where his seat at the dinner table stayed empty. But through all of it, one thought kept him going, the promise he'd made to himself and silently to his son. Nothing will stop me from being there when you graduate. So here he was, blending into the sea of families but holding a pride that was impossible to hide. His eyes never left the stage, waiting for the moment his son would appear. To everyone else, it was just another school event. But for Sergeant David 2 Block, this was more than a ceremony. This was redemption for every moment he had missed, a chance to be present for the milestone that mattered most. 2 sat quietly in the middle row, his back straight, his hands folded neatly in his lap. Years of military discipline had trained him to sit still, to observe without fidgeting, to blend into any environment, no matter how crowded. He didn't lean forward or crane his neck like some parents. He simply sat, steady as a rock, his eyes fixed on the stage, empty for now, but soon to be the center of the entire room's attention. He had chosen that seat deliberately, not too close to the front, where people might glance at him out of curiosity, and not so far back that he'd have to strain to see. Marines weren't in the habit of seeking the spotlight. They were taught to let their actions speak for them, and 2 carried that philosophy into every corner of his life. Even here at his son's high school graduation, still inside his chest, his heart swelled in a way no amount of training could hide. It wasn't the kind of pride that puffed you up and made you want to boast. No, this was the quiet kind, the deep, steady warmth of a father who had seen his child grow despite his own long absences. In his mind, he could still see Ethan as a boy, handwriting a little crooked but full of determination, sending him letters while he was deployed. Letters that sometimes started with "Dear Dad" and ended with doodles of stick figures. Holding rifles, the closest a little boy could come to understanding what his father was doing overseas. Those letters had been more than paper and ink. They were lifelines, out in places where the heat baked, your skin and the night stretched, endlessly under unfamiliar skies. 2 would unfold those notes and read them again and again. They reminded him why he was there, why he kept going, and who he was fighting for. Now, sitting in this auditorium, he realized this day wasn't just about Ethan's future. It was a bridge between the years he had missed and the years still ahead. In a few minutes, his son would walk across that stage and officially step into adulthood. And 2, for once, would be here not as a Marine, not as a soldier answering orders, but simply as a father watching his son take the next step. Just as the principal stepped up to the microphone and began the formal introduction of the graduating class, the cheerful hum of the room started to shift. The crowd leaned forward, eager to hear names. But Two's attention was pulled toward the far end of the auditorium. The heavy doors swung open with a soft creak, letting in a thin strip of sunlight that cut across the floor. Two men stepped through. They were both dressed in sharp, perfectly tailored black suits, the kind that didn't wrinkle when you moved. Even from a distance, Two could see the small bulge of earpieces tucked discreetly behind their ears. They didn't enter like guests who were late or parents trying to quietly find a seat. No, their movements were deliberate, precise. Their eyes scanned the crowd in smooth, methodical sweeps, as if they were checking every face against a mental list. They leaned toward each other briefly, murmuring something too low for anyone else to hear, then continued walking. And they weren't heading for an empty seat. They were walking straight toward him. Two felt the energy in the room shift again. The people sitting nearby began to take notice, whispering to one another. The conversation started as soft as a breeze, but quickly turned into a low ripple of speculation. Who were these men? Why were they here? No one else seemed to recognize them, but Two knew instantly. These weren't school officials. They weren't parents. And they certainly weren't regular security staff. The suits were too formal, their posture too rigid, their expressions too unreadable. Two had seen men like this before, men who belonged to agencies, where silence and precision were as important as firepower. He couldn't place their exact affiliation, but every instinct he had told him they weren't here to make small talk. Still, he kept his face neutral, watching them advance through the rows, their pace unhurried but purposeful. He could feel the attention of the crowd pressing in around him, though his focus stayed locked on the two approaching figures. Whatever they wanted, it wasn't casual. And whatever they were about to say, Two already knew. It wasn't going to be good news. The taller of the two men reached Two first. He stopped just close enough to enter, Two's personal space without brushing against him. A subtle tactic meant to assert authority without making a scene. He bent slightly at the waist, lowering his voice so no one but Two could hear. "Sergeant Block," he said, his tone even but edged with urgency. "We need you to come with us, now." Two's eyes narrowed slightly. He didn't move. His hand stayed clasped in his lap, but a faint crease formed between his brows. "I'm here for my son's graduation," he replied, his voice calm, but with a firmness that didn't invite debate. "It can wait." The shorter man stepped in then, leaning just enough to make his presence felt. His eyes were sharp, the kind that missed nothing. He gave a small shake of his head. "I'm afraid it can't," he said. His voice was steady, but there was no room in it for negotiation. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't loud. But it carried the weight of an order. The kind you'd hear from someone used to being obeyed without question. Around them, the murmur in the crowd had grown. A few parents nearby were now openly staring, pretending to adjust their programs while keeping their ears tuned in. Two could feel the shift, the warm, celebratory energy of the graduation now tinged with curiosity and unease. But his training kicked in. He knew better than to let his expression betray anything. Marines learned early to keep their emotions under lock and key, even when every instinct told them to brace for impact. He studied the two men carefully. Their stance was casual to the untrained eye, but their shoulders were square, their feet angled just so, ready to block him if he tried to walk in any other direction. This wasn't some polite request. It was a retrieval. Still, Two's gaze drifted toward the stage. His son wasn't out yet. That meant he still had time. And no matter what was waiting outside those auditorium doors, it wasn't going to pull him away from this moment, not without a fight. Two didn't so much as flinch. His body stayed perfectly still in that middle row seat, his back straight, eyes level. "Unless the building's on fire," he said slowly, each word deliberate. "Or my son's in danger, I'm not moving." The tall man's jaw tightened, a tiny movement, but enough to reveal a crack in his otherwise controlled demeanor. His eyes narrowed just slightly as he responded. "Orders, Sergeant. Classified, immediate." The way he said classified wasn't casual. It came with an unspoken weight, the kind of word that could pull a man from halfway, around the world without explanation. But Two didn't bite. His hands stayed folded, his breathing steady. By now, the atmosphere in the room had shifted entirely. Just minutes ago, the auditorium had been filled with the happy hum of family chatter. Now that noise had thinned into an almost uncomfortable silence. The families nearby had stopped whispering to each other. They were watching. Parents held their phones mid-air, some frozen in the act of snapping photos, unsure if they should keep recording or pretend not to notice. Tu could feel every set of eyes around him. Still, his attention stayed locked on the two men in suits. Years of service had trained him to recognize the subtleties, the way the shorter one's shoulders angled, slightly toward the aisle, giving the taller one space to maneuver if things escalated. The way their hands stayed close to their belts, not in a threatening grip but ready, always ready. Up on stage, the principal's voice was still droning through names and acknowledgments, but it was background noise now, muffled under the growing tension. Somewhere backstage, Ethan was probably fidgeting in line with the rest of the graduates, clutching his cap so it didn't fall off, completely unaware that his father, the man he'd been so proud to have in the audience, was just seconds away from being pulled out of the room. Tu's jaw clenched, but his tone remained level. He had faced firefights, ambushes, and missions that never made the news. This, though, was personal, and the unspoken message in his steady stare was crystal clear. Not here, not today. Years in the service had sharpened Tu's instincts to the point where they felt almost like a sixth sense. You didn't survive multiple deployments without learning to read a situation faster than most people could blink. And right now, every signal he was getting told him this didn't add up. If it were a real emergency, a threat in the building, an attack, or even a personal tragedy, these men wouldn't be this calm. In a genuine crisis, their movements would be sharper, their words clipped, their eyes constantly scanning for danger. But these two, they were steady, almost deliberate in how they approached him. There was no panic in their breathing, no urgency in their posture. Whatever they wanted, it was controlled, planned. His gaze flicked to the side, pretending to look toward the stage, but really studying the details. That's when he caught it. The faint glint of a coiled earpiece tucked neatly behind each man's ear. Clear tubing tucked under the collar. Not school security, not local police, federal. But if they were federal agents, why come here? And why come for him? He knew the feel of an arrest before it happened. The firm, assertive stance, the ready hand near the cuffs, the body angled for control. These men weren't posturing like that. Their feet were planted evenly. Their hands were loose at their sides. No tension in their shoulders, no visible weapon drawn. And that's what bothered him most. This wasn't a grab. It wasn't an arrest. This was something else, something that didn't fit the normal rules. He kept his face neutral, but inside, the mental checklist was running. Threat level, contained. Immediate danger to civilians, unlikely. Motive, unknown. Margin of error, 0. The last time he'd seen men with this exact quiet confidence was overseas, right before an operation that only a handful of people in the world even knew about. His pulse stayed steady, but the part of his brain trained for combat started cataloging exits, counting potential obstacles, and noting the exact distance to each of the men. He didn't know what game they were playing, but whatever it was, he was not stepping onto their board without answers. The men closed the gap between them and Tu, their polished shoes thudding softly against the auditorium floor. It wasn't a rush. It was a slow, measured approach, the kind that said, "We're in control here." The shorter one leaned in, his voice dropping just enough so only Tu could hear. "You're making a mistake," he said, his tone flat, stripped of any emotion. It wasn't a plea. It was a statement. Tu didn't blink. Years of service had trained him to meet eyes without flinching, to let silence be its own weapon. He turned his head slightly, locking onto the man's gaze. "No," he said, his voice low but carrying an edge sharp, enough to cut through the background chatter. "You are making a mistake thinking I'm walking out on my son's big day." The words hung there between them, heavier than the air-conditioned stillness in the room. The tall man's posture shifted, subtle, but to someone like Tu, it might as well have been a blaring siren. One foot angled slightly outward, shoulders loosened. His weight redistributed just enough to make a move if it came to that. It was the kind of body language Tu had seen 100 times before. The prelude to physical action. Around them, the audience's awareness had shifted from polite curiosity to open attention. Several parents had stopped pretending to look at the stage. Eyes darted from Tu to the men in suits, then back again. The tension was contagious, seeping into the air like an approaching storm. Two's muscles stayed loose, but every nerve was awake. He could feel the line they were walking. One wrong movement, one wrong tone, and this quiet standoff could become something messier. And yet, the thought of leaving that seat while Ethan was somewhere backstage, nervously waiting for his name to be called, was unthinkable. If these men wanted him to move, they'd have to do more than step into his space. They'd have to go through him, and for reasons they clearly didn't understand yet, that was going to be a much bigger challenge than they were prepared for. That's when it happened. It was subtle at first, just a flicker of movement in his peripheral vision. But then another, and another. From different corners of the auditorium, 6 men began to rise from their seats. They didn't stand the way ordinary guests did, fumbling with programs or smoothing down their jackets. They stood like soldiers, deliberate, coordinated, as if the signal had been given and the time to act was now. Each one wore identical marine dress blues, the deep navy fabric pressed razor-sharp, the medals on their chests glinting under the auditorium lights. But even before Two caught sight of the small but unmistakable gold insignia, he knew. These weren't just Marines. These were Navy SEALs. They moved with a quiet precision, their eyes locked on Two's location. Not rushing, not hesitating, just an unbroken, steady walk that carried the weight of unspoken authority. The room, already tense, seemed to draw in a collective breath. Conversations died mid-sentence. The only sound left was the slow, deliberate rhythm of polished shoes striking the floor. Each step seemed to echo louder than the last, bouncing off the walls like a drumbeat. The 2 men in suits noticed immediately. Their eyes darted toward the approaching figures, and for the first time since they'd walked in, their confidence wavered, not by much, but enough for someone like Two to see. He didn't move. He didn't need to, because now it was clear. Whatever game the suits thought they were playing, the rules had just changed. As the SEALs drew closer, their formation subtly shifted. Not enough for an untrained eye to notice, but enough to position themselves between Two and the men in suits. Their expressions were unreadable, their movements calm. But the message was loud and clear. This man is not leaving with you. Somewhere backstage, the principal's voice was still calling names, oblivious to the silent battle unfolding in the audience. But here, in the middle of the auditorium, time felt like it had slowed to a crawl. The suits had numbers. The SEALs had something far more powerful: brotherhood. And in this moment, it was the kind of shield nothing could penetrate. The lead SEAL stepped forward, his movements slow, deliberate, the kind of pace that told everyone in the room he wasn't rushing because he was in control. His frame was massive, shoulders broad enough to block the view of the 2 suits behind him. The lines on his face told a story of years, spent in places where the air burned. Your lungs in danger was a daily companion. He stopped directly between Two and the men in suits, planting himself like an immovable wall, his gaze locked on the taller suit, his eyes as sharp as a blade. "Is there a problem here?" he asked. His voice was low, calm, but it carried that undeniable weight, the kind that made people straighten their backs without thinking. Around them, the audience was silent, leaning forward, sensing that something far bigger than a graduation was unfolding right in front of them. "This doesn't concern you," the shorter suit shot back. His tone was clipped, meant to cut off the conversation. The SEAL didn't even blink. He took half a step closer, enough to close the space and make the air between them feel charged. "Everything concerning a Marine," he said flatly, "concerns us." That last word hit like a hammer. It wasn't loud, but the way he said it, us, carried more than just himself. It carried every man in the uniform behind him, every mission they'd bled through, every unspoken code they lived by. The suits held their ground, but their body language shifted. A slight adjustment in their stance, a quick glance at each other. To the untrained eye, it might have looked like nothing. But to anyone who had lived in high-stakes situations, it was clear they were recalculating. Two sat silently behind the wall of SEALs, his eyes moving between the faces of the men in front of him. He recognized that look in the lead. SEAL's eyes, the same unshakable focus he'd seen in the field. It was the look of someone who had already decided the outcome, and there was no point in arguing. The unspoken truth in the room was now crystal clear. If the suits wanted him, they were going to have to take him through them. The SEALs moved without speaking, their coordination effortless. like water flowing into a shape it had taken 1,000 times before. They stepped into position around two, each man shifting just enough to create a barrier. Not a tight, aggressive circle, but a loose, confident wall. It was the kind of formation that said, "We're not here to start a fight, but we'll finish one if we have to." The crowd felt the shift immediately. Parents who had been whispering a moment ago now sat frozen in their seats, their eyes darting between the dark suits and the dress blues. Somewhere in the back, a small child asked what was happening, but his parent quickly shushed him, eyes still locked on the unfolding scene. It was a clash of two forces, the polished, silent authority of the suits versus the raw, unbreakable bond of military brotherhood. Both sides exuded control, but their power came from different places. The suits had rank, orders, and a mission. The SEALs had loyalty, honor, and a willingness to stand their ground no matter the cost. Tu felt it in his chest, that tight, unexpected lump in his throat. He had known many of these men before, fought alongside some, heard stories about others. But in this moment, it wasn't about shared history or war stories. This was about something far simpler and far more important. They weren't here because they had to be. They weren't here because of orders. They were here because they believed a Marine should never stand alone, especially not on the day. He came to watch his son graduate. The SEAL closest to Tu gave the faintest nod without turning his head, a silent reassurance that said, "You're not going anywhere unless you want to." From his seat, Tu could see the muscles in the suit's jaws tighten, their posture shifting under the weight of the unspoken challenge. For the first time since they had entered the room, they weren't in complete control. The air between the two groups was thick enough to cut. No one spoke. No one moved. But the message was clear. Sergeant David Two-Block wasn't going anywhere. Not today, not while these men were standing. The two men in suits stood their ground for a moment, their expressions unreadable. But their eyes told a different story. They flicked from one SEAL to the next, scanning faces that looked carved from stone. Every man in dress blues held the kind of calm that came from years of living in the space between danger and duty. The taller suit's gaze lingered on the lead, SEAL, the broad-shouldered, Wall who had planted himself in his path. Neither blinked. Neither moved. It was the kind of silent contest that could last seconds but feel like hours. Then came the smallest shift, a breath in, a tightening of the jaw. The suits glanced at each other, a quick flick of the eyes that said everything without a word. They were trained for confrontation, yes. They dealt with armed suspects, volatile situations, people who didn't want to comply. But this was different. This wasn't just one man refusing to leave. This was 6 elite operators standing between them and their target. 6 men who weren't bluffing, whose loyalty was so deep it didn't need to be announced. And there, in that silent calculation, the suits realized the truth. They weren't going to win this fight. Today, not without turning an entire room into a battlefield. After a pause that seemed to stretch across the entire auditorium, the taller one finally spoke. His voice was as flat as before, but now there was a trace of resignation under it. "We'll be in touch, Sergeant." It wasn't a surrender, not entirely. It was a promise, maybe even a warning. But it also meant one thing two needed to hear in this moment. They were leaving. Without another word, they stepped back, turning in unison. Their polished shoes clicked against the floor as they made their way up the aisle. No hurried steps. No looking over their shoulders. Just the measured pace of men retreating on their own terms. Every eye in the room followed them, until the auditorium doors closed softly behind them. Only then did the air feel lighter, the tension loosening its grip. But two knew, and so did the SEALs, that this wasn't over. Today, though, the mission was simple. Stay in that seat and see his son walk across that stage. Minutes later, the principal's voice rang out over the auditorium speakers, clear and formal. Ethan Block. For a moment, everything else faded. The tension from earlier, the silent standoff, even the lingering presence of the SEALs standing guard nearby. Two rose from his seat, his dress blues catching the stage lights as he straightened to full height. On stage, Ethan appeared from the line of graduates, his cap tilted slightly to one side, his gown swaying with each step. He walked with a mix of nervous energy and quiet confidence, holding the diploma like it was the key to the rest of his life. Their eyes met across the space, father and son. It was only a second, maybe less, but it felt like time had slowed just for them. Ethan's grin broke wide. The kind of smile that said, "I see you, Dad." He didn't know what had almost pulled his father away moments earlier. Didn't know about the suits, the standoff, or the 6 silent protectors in the crowd. But he could feel it, the unwavering pride, radiating from the man who had fought to be there. Cameras flashed, each burst of light capturing the moment in still frames that would never tell the full story. Applause filled the auditorium, a wave of sound that seemed to wrap around them both. Somewhere behind two, a parent let out a loud cheer, and the graduates on stage clapped for one another as Ethan crossed to shake the principal's hand. Two felt something shift inside his chest, a tightness loosening. It wasn't just relief, it was the deep, steady warmth of a promise kept. All the miles traveled, the deployments, the missed birthdays and holidays, they all led here, and he had made it. As Ethan walked off stage, diploma in hand, Two knew he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Not in some distant desert, not on a covert mission, not answering to orders that could pull him away at any second. Here, in this moment, watching his son step into the next chapter of his life. And for the first time in years, nothing else mattered. As the final names were called and the graduates tossed their caps into the air, the room erupted in cheers and laughter. Families surged forward, phones raised, arms outstretched to embrace their children. In the middle of the joyful chaos, the 6 seals began to move, not with the rigid formality they'd shown before, but with a quiet, deliberate grace. They didn't make speeches or linger for thanks. No one rushed to stop them. They simply faded into the crowd. Their presence still felt even as they slipped out of sight. Each one gave Two a small nod as they passed. The kind of silent acknowledgement soldiers give when words aren't necessary. The lead seal's nod was the slowest, carrying with it a promise. "We've got your back." Two returned the gesture, his eyes holding theirs until they were gone. Around them, no one asked questions. Maybe they were too caught up in their own celebrations. Or maybe they sensed that some things are better left unspoken. But everyone in that room, whether they understood the details or not, felt the weight of what had just happened. Ethan found his father in the crowd and threw his arms around him, nearly knocking the cap off Two's head. Two laughed, a deep, genuine laugh that had been absent from his life for far too long. Ethan pulled back, his grin wide. "You made it, Dad. I told you I would," Two replied, his voice steady, though the truth was he'd almost been wrong. Over Ethan's shoulder, Two's eyes flicked to the auditorium doors where the men in suits had left. He knew they would return. Maybe not tomorrow, maybe not next week, but someday. Orders that come with the word classified never vanish. And when they came back, it might not be as simple as standing his ground. But that was tomorrow's problem. Today was for his son, for the walk across the stage, the proud smile, the diploma clutched in his hand. Today was for the moments no one could take from them, no matter what insignia they wore or what orders they carried. And for the first time in years, nothing, not even a classified order, would take that away. If that moment gave you chills, imagine how many more stories like this are out there. Don't miss the next one. Hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you're here for every twist, every mystery, and every moment that matters.